Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Journeys to Belonging. If truth be told, I just met today's guest. We were part of the Education Speaker Summit, and I mentioned that I'm a podcaster. He immediately messaged me in the chat that he'd love to be on my show. And from the little that we interacted, I could tell he had been on quite a journey in his education career and that I would enjoy getting to know him, same as my listeners. And so I just want to say welcome to the podcast, Mike Crabtree. This is such a nice thing for me because this is the first time really in all the episodes I've done where I really don't know my guest that well.
Well, that's great, Eileen. I am so excited to be here talking to you and talking to you specifically about belonging. The whole concept is very dear and near to my heart and has been even before I started a career as an educator.
Yeah, I could tell that from just a little bit I gleaned from the internet and things that you have posted. So I obviously don't know a whole lot about you, and neither do my listeners. So please tell us about Mike Crabtree.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. Born and raised in Tennessee. I'm originally from close to Middle Tennessee, but grew up in a very rural community. Small farm was my experience growing up. Working class family.
Mhm.
Neither of my parents had finished high school. My dad was just short of a credit. My mother didn't attend high school. She went straight to work in a factory. Of course, that's some time ago. And from there, I had several great working experiences, but I'm the first generation
Mhm.
college graduate from my family. And that's given me a lot of insight about how schools work because I come to education from outside of being a real successful student or having educated really middle class parents.
Mhm.
When I've been had an experience where I went to college, dropped out, was encouraged to go back to college, was encouraged to become an educator, which I felt like that was my path in life. And after 33 years, a couple of years ago, I retired. My educational journey includes being a teacher of gifted students,
Mhm.
and my students always made me say I was not a gifted teacher. I was a teacher of gifted students. Yeah, they're yeah, they're kind of smart like that. And from there, I was an administrator in special education, system wide. I went back to the building level as an assistant principal at the high school level, then at the middle school level, and my proudest moment was serving 7 years as a middle school principal. School's about 750 students, mostly rural, but a combination of
Mhm.
rural and suburban students. From there, I went to the central office as assistant director of curriculum and instruction. Had a chance to work with some great people who understood the mission, who loved each other, and we lifted some big rocks that we're all very, very proud of. My last act as an administrator was in March of 2020
Mhm.
when the pandemic led to a shutdown here in Tennessee. And unfortunately, I've been on the sidelines watching as family and friends have gone through all the trauma that's brought along. So I'm
Yeah.
at the point now to where I want to contribute. I feel like I have something to say. I'm not bashful about saying it. I love life. I love living life, and I love sharing life. And to me, there's no better place for that to happen than within a school building.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. I love that. And that is quite a journey, quite a life's journey. And a first generation to go to college and then end up in education. That really is a wonderful background for understanding many of your students and where they're coming from also. So the first question I always ask my guests, Mike, is if I say the word belonging or feeling a sense of belonging, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
Family and family, and it extends beyond what you think about as kinship or even your friend circle. To
Mhm.
me, I think about the work environments that I've been in.
Right.
And one of the things I said that I was proud of is being a middle school principal. That's what I want engraved on my headstone when I die. And that will say about as much about me as people would want to know. But when I was a middle school, well, building level administrator, but especially as a principal, one of the things that I really, really wanted for my school was we talked about being a family. And a lot of schools do, and they'll have that in a mission statement. I wanted us to be a family. And I leave that really caused me to stop and think, okay, what is that? And
Mhm.
just to condense that down, it's sharing life. It's living life with each other. And if you look at what a school is a living thing. We have more impact, in reach, and influence in a community than any other institution. That's church, that's banks, that's businesses, that's law enforcement, hospitals,
Mhm.
anything. We're there and we share life. Kids live their lives with us.
Mm.
Parents indirectly live their lives with us. And of course, as faculty, um, we live lives with each other.
Mhm.
And if that's the way it's going to be, let's make the best of that. And the way to make the best of that is first realizing this is not a job. It's not even a career. It's sharing life with each other.
Right. Yeah, that's beautiful. You just summarized my book. Thank you. because because I talk about personal belonging and professional belonging, and it's all related to everything that you just said, which is when you create that sense of family and truly family where everybody cares about each other and really invests in each other and becomes that community where people begin to rely on each other and know they can rely on each other. That's just so special. Thank you,
I,
Mike. I love
I
that.
Thank
Mhm.
you. I get so much whenever I see former students out, and 2 things. One was whenever we have visitors in the school, it's always a compliment if they say, so many times they were standing in the foyer, and they would say, "There's something special about the school. I can't put my finger on it." But I've heard so many people talk about the culture, and if you have a good culture, that it creates a vibe, and I believe that because I've heard so many people say that. The other thing is that when I see either former coworkers, or mostly students, and they say, I really love being in middle school. Now, how many middle schoolers can say that throughout the country? That's not
True.
common. But I've heard
Right.
that so much, and I'm sure I've had some pass through this say, thank God I'm out of there. But they look back and they say, it was special. It was
Mhm.
good, and that was something that we all created. Eileen, where I learned that was not in the College of Education, where I got my pre-service education. It wasn't there actually. It goes back to my hometown, and I've been really fortunate and blessed with being able to work around people and in work settings, to where there was a feeling of family. And
Nice.
one of those came. I worked in a small livestock feed manufacturing barn, sacking corn. Okay, now I may be getting out of the culture here,
No,
but
that's
in rural
okay.
Tennessee, sacking corn. I was sacking corn. That's what I did. But I worked with a family. His family owned 2 brothers, and oh my gosh, everybody that came in there in a farming rural community, you
Mhm.
knew each other, and you took care of each other. You laughed together, you cried together when there was a hardship. Then I went on and I became an emergency medical technician. I was an EMT while I went to college. I was working full
Mhm.
time, and I understand those services. And
Yeah.
you have to act as a family there. If you don't, you're not going to make it.
Right.
That's where the support comes from. And that's how we settled our differences. It's not like we got along all the time, but we loved each other on a deep level that we knew what the
Mm-hmm.
mission was. That's where I learned you got to have that mission first. Everybody has to know the mission and has to accept that mission. And
Mm-hmm.
then that's where everything else comes in. And I was great there. We lived together. We laughed together. We cried together. So when I went into education, that's what I wanted it wherever I went. I wanted to work hard and play hard. And I wanted my kids to
Yeah.
have that, my students. And then when I became an administrator, that's what I wanted my staff to have.
Yeah. Yeah, that's wonderful. I know that when you walk into a building and you feel that energy, it's just a different energy. It's from what's on up on the walls and the way people react as you walk in the door and walk down the hallways and walk into the classrooms. You're right, Mike. It really is a culture. And you can tell from the moment that you step inside. And that's just so wonderful. I've always said that, just as an aside, I've always said that I feel like the most difficult grade levels for me to be involved with, and I never had the chance to teach them, would be middle school. And so to hear you talk so lovingly about middle school, it's like, well, maybe I should think twice about that. Not that I'm planning on unretiring myself, but I probably should have talked to you many years ago when I was thinking about where I wanted to teach, because you definitely are convincing about middle school. So our next question is, take us on your journey through your educator experience. Where did your passion for education begin? And now that you're retired, how does it continue?
Okay. Great questions. One of the I've always loved learning. It doesn't matter, what setting or anything like that. But things that catch me, I'm more of an opportunistic learner. That if I got friends that are into something that I don't know anything about that looks interesting, I want to get involved in that. I'm not really a seeker of by myself, but
Mm-hmm.
I like to learn. The other day I was on social media and a question came up, said, "What's your reading story?" And one of the things in the middle school that we did was we really focused on developing a culture of reading. And it's not yeah, that's a long story too. That's a whole nother podcast. But uh, there's so much to reading, and a lot of people think, "Well, I'm not a reader. I don't like to read," but they'll pick up a magazine or they'll go through a DIY or and they read for information. They look at the
Mm-hmm.
newspaper or they'll pick up something online. That's reading. That's literacy. So I've always had a heart for that. When I was working for the ambulance service as an EMT. This is how I got into education. We were called in to do a professional development session for my former teachers at the small high school I went to. Me and a coworker. And when we went in, they were, Eileen, disrespectful. Sometimes teachers can be less. They can be a difficult audience, and
Mm-hmm.
this group was. And while I was trying to explain to them life-saving things to do to save lives, they were knitting, they were reading the paper, they were talking to each other. So I kind of had an outburst of my own. But they were good role models for that. So I had an outburst and I told them, "Hey, what's the deal? 2 years ago when I was here, if I'd acted like that, you'd have me standing out in the hall or sitting down to the principal's office. What I'm trying to teach you is really more important than anything I learned here." And Eileen, what the response was? They looked at
What?
me and they went back to knitting and reading
Oh,
their newspaper. So that evening, my
wow.
wife, who I just started dating, she was an exceptional student, quite the opposite of myself in high school. But we were talking, and she had just started her freshman year. She was becoming an educator. And anyway, I was complaining about that experience. And I
Mm-hmm.
said, I said, I had worked so hard because I wanted to impress them. And I had this lesson and I had it drawn up and I was really passionate about what I was doing. And I said, they didn't even listen. I said, it's not as if they could teach all that good anyway. So my wife said, well, why don't, if you think you could do better, why don't you become a teacher? The world needs better teachers.
Nice.
So it got me thinking, and my experiences in EMS, where they bring the ambulance out and show it to kindergarten kids. Nobody else wanted to do that I worked with. I
Right.
was younger, so I would volunteer for all that. I got to teaching. I had an opportunity to teach Red Cross first aid courses as an 18, 19-year-old.
How fun.
So all those experiences really prepared me. So when I went back to school, I had a plan together, and I thought, this is what I want to do.
Mhm.
This really combines that love of learning
Yeah.
with a love of sharing what you learned and being able to interpret it. And those experiences of not always being a successful student
Mhm.
really helped me out as far as reaching kids and being very cognizant about what was relevant to them.
Yes.
Now
Yeah.
that's where I've been. Yeah, that's where I've been.
Mhm.
So where I'm at right now is, it's kind of the same way. When you retire, it's cool for a while. Every day is like a Saturday. I recommend it highly. But looking around, one of the things was looking around, I still wanted to be relevant. And it's like, um, I retired kind of young, and it's not like I'm out of date. My shelf life has expired.
Right.
So that's what I was getting back into, and for the last 15 years or so, one of the specialty areas that I've done as far as presenting to educators was on the topic of poverty and how to reach
Mm.
and bridge gaps between students of poverty, parents and communities of poverty, and typically middle class school values.
Mhm.
So that's what I'm doing now, among other things. But new principal burnout. I've done some work with that. That's very
Okay.
interesting. My
Mm.
son is a third year assistant principal, so he has a heart for that as well. So we're doing some father son things on that, which is
Yeah.
interesting because I think I know it all. I know it all. He thinks he knows it all. So that's kind of we have a good
And
time
you
with it.
meet somewhere
We have
in
a good time with it.
between.
We
Yeah.
meet somewhere in between.
Yeah.
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 So our
Yeah.
audience will have to decide who's right, which is me.
That's fun. And you must be so proud of him, I'm sure, another generation of educators. And that's really cool that you and your wife had such an influence on his decision to follow that path. That's always really, really wonderful. So
Yeah, definitely. I will
yeah.
give a shout out to my daughter also.
Mm-hmm.
She's a couple of years younger, and she is in HR, but and
Mm-hmm.
she was adamant she did not want to go into education like the rest of us. But
Yeah.
one of the things she'll say secretly is that I really love HR when I get to teach. So she's a
Aha.
secret. She's kind of a closet teacher, but I'm proud of
Mm-hmm.
both of them as far as wanting to share and sharpen the skills of others. That's cool.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, and that's definitely needed because if you're modeling, if you're teaching in other positions, you're creating the possibilities for others. So it's also a kind of mentoring and coaching, which is teaching, right? So yeah, that's
True.
wonderful. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, as part of your position as Assistant Director of Curriculum and Development, you led several special projects, including your district's digital conversion initiative. Many schools
Yes.
and districts meet with resistance to these kinds of change initiatives. Can you kind of tell me and tell our listeners about how you went about planning and implementing it? And if you met with resistance, how did you overcome it? And even not
Yeah.
just directly related to that particular initiative, because you were involved with many others. So please expand it as
Mm.
you'd like to.
Yeah, I'd be glad to talk about the digital conversion. First of all, when I interviewed for the job at the central office, they asked a question about what steps would you take to manage a digital conversion process? And I had to be honest, I didn't know exactly what they were talking about, digital conversion. I had to
Mhm.
Google it, and it was one to one. And it's like, oh, one to one. Yeah, okay, I get that. Um, the school I was at, and kind of my background, teaching gifted and growing up professionally in the 80s, I always had a hand in the technology. I always tried to keep up with the technology. And one of the things that I saw, especially being the leader of the middle school, was that you have a limited amount of resources, and so you
Mhm.
have to put a lot of time and energy into getting technology. You can't be frivolous with what you get. You can't have
Right.
something today and it be out of date tomorrow.
Yep.
So it really made me stop and think, what is relevant, what works, and does it meet
Mhm.
the mission? What is the mission? Is providing the best educational experience possible.
Right.
And part of that is academic growth, achievement and growth. And
Mhm.
so when I went to the district level, one of the things that we had decided, we built a great team. I had two great leaders, one on the IT side who is a phenomenal person, another who was on the professional development side. And so
Mhm.
we have both of those needs met, which is the key to a success. And when we looked at, okay, what do we do? And the first thing we had to decide, Eileen, was, okay, are these going to be tools? Are they going to be something that we can brag about having? Are they going to be something we just turn the kids loose on, and
Mhm.
we buy the programs for, and just turn them loose and say, okay, here you go.
Mhm.
We did not want to do that. We wanted to make sure that our instructional strategies were right,
Mhm.
and that technology was used to support those effective instructional technologies. So
So
that's what
important.
learning comes first. We always
Yes.
said from day one, student learning comes first. If
Mhm.
that was our mission, that if something came along, it looked good, but if it didn't help us meet that mission of student learning, we pass. And we did. We passed on a lot of stuff. But when we got into it, the buying the Chromebooks, which we thought would be the hard part, was actually the easiest. It was far easier to put devices in the hands of kids than we were prepared for. So, man, we just went full court press on how do we train our teachers in this. And we're talking about 900 certified staff, so
Oh,
it's not a
wow.
small, not a small endeavor here. And
Mhm.
how do we do that? And Colleen Madison, who was our I don't know what her title was. She wanted to be called a czarina, but that was a little extravagant. But she was our PD leader, and she worked tirelessly. And there were some others, and some of the things that we got everybody on the same page with a homemade training. We modeled as we went. One of the biggest things that we just so happened, and you talk about things, the tumblers of the universe clicking in unison. This is one
Mhm.
of those things that our state department had sent us to a training on developing teacher leader programs, coaches
Interesting.
within the schools, not removing teachers from the classroom, but
Mhm.
giving them time to be coaches in areas of need or expertise. We were looking at, and it was kind of like one of those light bulb moments that were like, okay, yeah, literacy, math. And then it was like, man, we got this whole new thing with digital conversion coming up. We
Sure.
have these we have a handful of front runners that know what they're doing. Why don't we do this with technology? And so we did. And it was one of the
Wow.
most successful things, where every school had two resident teacher leaders, which were on-site coaches. We provided training to. We provided training on how to be a coach. We learned a lot. We weren't perfect by any means, but we learned so
Mhm.
much. And then when we did visible learning from the John Hattie School of Research on
Right.
instructional strategies, uh, that meshed together with our teacher leader programs. And so that allowed us to build the instructional strategies along with the digital conversion and the technology. So
Right.
that took us much farther. And one of the things
Mhm.
that I would tell people is, if you do it right, if you have the right goal
Yes.
in mind, the right mission in mind, and you do it right, the impact and power of what you do is far greater than a Chromebook or a device. It's a
Absolutely.
culture, it's a total mindset changer. It's a total culture changer. And
Mhm.
I'm proud. I think that that's what we did. The last year and a half, I'm really proud of my district. They were able to keep going and maintain learning. And there's a lot of talk about learning loss. The learning loss here was much, much less than it was in other areas of the state. And I think a
Sure.
lot of it has to do with those, not the devices. We had those, that's good,
Right.
but it was the mindset of the students and the
Yes.
teachers and the
Yes.
administrators that we can get this done.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And you hit upon a key piece of that is that, the whole thing about things aligning is that you actually had uh leaders who were teachers in their classrooms who were already bought into the idea of and were comfortable with it. And so they were able to coach and also be able to lead the others and make them feel more comfortable with the whole idea. And then on top of that, not assuming that just because they were good at it that they would be good coaches, but giving them that training. So I love the fact that it was looked upon so holistically. It was a whole package that you needed to put together, along with aligning it with the mission and the instructional, the instruction, that it all had to align, and it was there to help and support, but it wasn't just the jazzy thing that you were going to put so you could tell the rest of the community, look what we have. I just, like I said, so holistic. I loved that. And obviously that's, the reason why it was so successful, because that's the way you all looked at it, and you had everybody on board who was leading it. So,
And
uh,
Eileen,
mhm,
to go
sure.
back to your theme of belonging,
Hmm.
when we brought these teacher leaders together, and there were around 45 of them,
Okay.
two to three in every school. When we brought them together, we met once a month. We would go to state conferences together.
Okay.
They got to where they would present. You talk about sharpening iron. That
Mm,
was a family. That was a community. They had a lot in mind. They love
mm.
to work together. They love playing together. There were friendships that I would call them my TTL family,
Wow.
and that special part of belonging and being part. And we knew that what we were part of wasn't a digital conversion; it was a culture change.
Yes,
So yeah,
absolutely.
having those big goals and those big missions are what creates belonging as well.
Sure. And that rubs off on everybody else that they're interacting with. And when they did meet resistance, because I'm sure at times they either met
Yeah.
resistance or they met people who were uncomfortable with the technology, felt like
Yes.
they weren't able to do it for whatever the reason, they had people to go back to in that community to say, I'm not sure what to tell. Have you had this kind of problem? What should I do? And they knew they would have people that they could rely on to give them those answers from that community. And that's the wonderful part of it. So I love how you related that to that sense of belonging, because yes, it's all related and it does rub
We
off on everybody. Hmm.
we definitely met with resistance, and that's kind of funny. One of the first things that I wanted to do as a leader, uh, I got together a slideshow with the progression of what we were going to do, the phases that we were going to do,
Sure.
and the two things. And I went to every school, spoke to every staff, and me, that was on me, and
Hmm.
I wanted them to have a face. And this is who answers for this. This is who's responsible. If you have a problem, if you have a question, I will help you. But one of the things that we said was is that we don't have all the answers, and we're all starting in the same place. And you may not feel that way. You may not feel we're not going to leave anybody behind. And that was my
Hmm.
commitment. I said, This is our commitment, guys,
Yeah.
is that we're going to get through this together. We're going to learn through this together. It's worth it. It is worth it. And to come at the end, and you always have that, you have that stage where people have fear of change, and it's
Hmm.
learning something new, Eileen. It's taking that step out about, what if I suck at
Sure.
this?
Right.
What if I can't do this anymore? This is my livelihood.
Mhm.
And we had all those questions, but we answered them head on. We answered them head on. We didn't shy away from them. And if I didn't have answers, I would say, look, I don't have an answer, but we're
Mhm.
going to find out. We'll be there. And we had those resources that I would send people into teachers I meet in the supermarket crying. They'd say, I'm so afraid of that. I'm afraid I can't do this. And I'd say, I'll have somebody out. And I had resources to be able to pick up the phone and say, go in that teacher's classroom, find out what they need, and stay with them until they get it.
Wow.
And that was a community builder, and really
Mhm.
it taught us that we can do these big things. But the resistance part, I did go into the high school one time, their largest high school where I was an AP, where my kids went to school, where my wife taught, was an administrator at one time. And I'd heard, hey, they're really wanting, they're going to chew on your behind, because this is not going over. And I didn't have it. So I said, okay, I'm going to go. And I went and had a touch of the flu, I think, and it was miserable. I felt miserable. And they were the last group. And I said, look, guys, I know, because they were like my family. And I said, look,
Mhm.
guys, I know you said you're going to chew on me, and I'm going to give you a chance to do that. I said, but just let me tell you that we were going through these training modules. And I said, I went through this training module 2 days ago. And I said, I got so frustrated that I had to call my son and ask him for help. Well, they knew my son. So they all started laughing. Then I said, do you know, I said, here I am supposed to be leading this. And I said, I struggle with it.
Mhm.
I said, so yeah, if
Yeah.
you struggle with it, listen, I totally get it. I said, I could absolutely kick the asses of whoever thought this up, which was me. And, we broke the ice, and then it was like they
Yeah.
started sharing what their concerns and fears and
Mhm.
what the problems were. And then we got those problems fixed. And a few months later, they came back and they said, we said that we resisted, and we didn't like this, but we hung on, and we helped each other. And they were complimenting those teacher leaders. They were complimenting others, and they were saying, we got through it. And that was huge. You know, that's huge.
That is a big deal because when you think that you're not going to be able to do something and then you accomplish it, it's, and to be celebrated also. Wow,
Yeah.
that just builds up your confidence like a hundredfold. But I want to also pick up on what you were doing and what your team was doing, but you especially by being that voice, going out and being vulnerable, showing them that it's okay not to know. Sometimes I don't know, but we'll all be in this together. And that communication part of the vision. These are the phases. What happens often in education, no matter where you are in the world, is somebody will come in with a big idea and have it in their head and maybe share it with a small group of people and knows where it's headed, but not share it with anybody. And that is really scary for people who are just getting at the beginning and thinking, oh, this is just another flavor of the day. And we're going to all have to
Yeah.
get involved with it because we're forced to, and we're going to be evaluated about it. And then we're going to just trash it. And so there's no
This too shall
buy-in.
this
Mm-hmm.
too shall pass syndrome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's common here, and everything that we brought up, and
Mm-hmm.
all the, that was one initiative that we did. Heard that on every one of them, but it got to be to where when I would hear it, I would take it seriously, but I'd laugh inside because I would think, "You're saying this too shall pass," and I'm thinking, "You too shall pass," because
Mm-hmm.
this will happen. This will happen, and you can say that it won't, but you'll come around. So most of the time, if you got a good goal, and you're well organized, and you got people who are
Yes.
bought in, the others, if it's worthy, others will
Mm-hmm.
eventually come along.
Oh, absolutely. And if you have a plan, even if the plan doesn't work out completely like you thought,
Yeah,
and you share that plan. So this is what we're doing short term, but this is where we're headed. It really
yeah,
makes a difference. That's your visionary leader. So
true.
yeah, yeah. So, also as part of your responsibilities, you provided training to educators in your district in diverse areas, such as, and you mentioned it earlier, student poverty.
Mhm.
Some things you didn't mention: boys in crisis, grant writing. And you
Yeah.
also talked about programming for gifted students. I'm really interested, and I think my listeners would be too, in knowing more about those areas you focused on, and maybe some background about your district and the student needs, which you've mentioned here and there already, but interested to see what those needs are and how those initiatives or how those areas became sort of front and center for you.
Okay, I'll pick out a couple if that's okay.
Sure.
First of all, is a little bit about Blount County Schools. Blount County is, like I said, it's about 10,000, 11,000 students, a big geographic area. We have two smaller school systems,
Mhm.
city school systems, that are within our jurisdiction. Uh, there are a lot of competition, and it's very difficult for us because uh, they receive additional funding from their city governments.
I
So
see.
yeah, it's a competition. It's competition for students and who goes where and everything else. I always had that attitude coming to Blount County that we don't want to be second to anybody. We want to work with people. We get along very well with the city groups, by the way.
Mhm.
But there is a little bit of that. Fighting for resources, fighting for money. Tennessee's not at the top of the list in the United States as far as funding for their students, and Blount County is about middle of the road for Tennessee. So you can
Mhm.
tell kind of where we're at.
Right.
Um, when looking at okay, some of those initiatives over the years, when I was at the central office, one of the first big changes that I was kind of directly involved with, but it wasn't my project. I was a assistant coordinator, but it was inclusion, and it was mainstreaming our special needs students
Mhm.
and putting them in the classroom, and that was huge. That was a long term. Really had to. That's where I learned when I went back up to the central office how to implement things, where you get by and where you communicate, where you problem solve, where you listen. You
Mhm.
do a lot of listening. Um, those type things. One of the things that I see, we're about, I don't know if I mentioned this or not, we're about 65% free and reduced lunch here. So
Oh,
there's a
wow.
significant amount of poverty within our district. And when I talk about poverty, one of my last things before I retired was taking a look at the literacy gap. And there is a huge literacy gap, research shows, but between kids when they come prepared for kindergarten
Mhm.
and their literacy skills really determines whether or not they're ready or if they're
Sure.
behind or if we can hit the ground running with these kids or not. And what we found is that informally that probably about 25-35% of our kids are ready or capable to hit the ground running in kindergarten,
Mhm.
literacy wise. One of the things that I found, discovered through data, a lot of people give data a hard time, and I get that, but there's a purpose for it if it's used right. And
Right.
one of the things that I looked at in the data was, wait a minute, that sounds familiar. So I pulled third grade literacy scores, who was on grade level,
Mhm.
about 35%.
Wow.
So I did some more digging. Eighth grade, 33, 35%.
Oh,
12th
wow.
grade, ACT scores, about a third.
Mm.
Here's what here's the big revelation with that, Eileen, is that I looked at that and it hit me that we are really good at maintaining kids education wise where they come to us. If they're ready, we progress them. If
Yes.
they're not ready or anywhere on that
Mhm.
spectrum, we
Mhm.
progress them too, but we don't close the gaps very good.
Mm.
And that's the thing that I really wanted, and that is primarily with literacy, which is incredibly important. Reading
Right.
and then writing, communication skills to me
Yes.
are the most important things. Math, of course, math, everything else, but it falls off of that. So
Mm.
I'm passionate about what's the deal? How do we do that at all levels? Because it's not just one group of students that you address. It's students with all sorts of issues with reading that you address. And so I wanted to make sure on that tier one, the big curriculum, let's get something. Our kids come in, they lack general knowledge for one thing. They're not able to take advantage of curriculum or reading materials that we have. How do we build that?
Right.
And right after we came in, the State Department came in and said, okay, for the curriculum adoption, it's going to be nothing but um, general knowledge or knowledge building curriculum, which is great. We've seen tremendous results on test scores and otherwise with students,
Nice.
and it benefits all students. But
Sure.
most importantly, it benefits those kids in poverty who come in behind already. Does a
Right.
tremendous job of catching them up bit by bit, which is what I wanted. So that's, I don't know if that answered your question or not,
It
but
does.
at least I got to
Yes.
talk. At least I got to talk about it. But that's something I'm still very passionate about, is
Mhm.
making sure that all of our kids have equity in access to literacy.
Right. And I know that's one thing that you said that you are really passionate about um, uh, presenting now that you're doing consulting work in your retirement and so forth. So I definitely wanted to highlight that. This isn't on my list of questions, but I did notice it when we were on the summit, and now I notice it too. Those guitars behind you. Please
Yeah,
tell me about your relationship with music.
I'm a terrible guitar player, but I love to play. These guitars, I wish I could show you. I've got a room full.
Wow.
These are actually Japanese lawsuit copies.
Oh,
And let me explain that, because a lot of people don't know what that means.
mm-hmm.
Back in the 70s, primarily in the 1970s, Japanese companies would manufacture guitars that were copies near identical to expensive American made
Oh,
guitars of
wow.
higher quality.
Mm-hmm.
So now when you find them, they quit making them in the early 80s. So, they haven't been around for a while, but you can still find them in pawn shops and some music stores and things like
That's
that.
great.
So I became a collector of Japanese lawsuit copies. And I am a thrift shopper. I do yard sales, rummage sales. Love
Nice.
that. I do have a Facebook page called Yard Sailing, SALING, with Mike and Dave, which has all of my finds on it and things. So I'll send you that information. You can post that too in case anybody's interested, because
Sure.
that's just where we just get out and have fun, things that we find. One of the
That's
things
great.
that was a tie-in with the middle school
Mm-hmm.
is when we decided our kids needed to become better readers. How do you do that with a wide population? Well, you
Mm-hmm.
have them read more. So how do we do that? A copy of Donalyn Miller's Book Whisperer was
Mm.
the match that lit the fire for us. And so we
Wow.
went by that and challenged our kids. Of course, you have to have a reward if they meet a challenge, right?
Sure.
So we came up with ideas, and we're going to call this Reading Rocks. And at the end of it, we're going to throw a concert, a rock concert in our gym
Awesome.
with a real band, real lights, the whole deal. Because a
Wow.
lot of our kids, where they live, rural and
Mm-hmm.
otherwise, uh, I don't know if they'd ever have a chance to see a
Sure.
real. So I wanted to make it a big deal. And so anyway, being the principal and a terrible guitar player, but because I'm boss,
You made it
I
happen?
said, yeah, sure. Yeah. And yeah, and I had a great literacy leader. Terry Bradshaw was awesome. She's retiring this year, but she was awesome. And her son was a great guitar player. So we got a band together. And of
Uh,
course they let me in because, you know, I'm the
you're the
principal.
boss. Yeah.
Yeah, they turned my amplifier down, but that's okay. I got to get out and act like a rock star. So that's kind of my background
So,
with music.
that's awesome. Not quite what I thought, but it's even awesomer. I love it. Great story. Oh, Mike, this has been fantastic. I've just enjoyed so much getting to know you and hearing your journey. Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about that I didn't ask you about?
I think we covered pretty much everything. I appreciate, Eileen. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share. That's what makes a teacher in all of us is
Mhm.
just that enthusiasm to share. And you gave me a platform to do that. And I've loved talking and meeting you. It's been a
Well,
pleasure.
same here. And I'm so glad you reached out in the chat when we were at the summit and said, I'd like to be your guest because this has been a real treat for me. Thank you so much. And other than your Facebook thrift page, how can people find you if they want to hop off? And of course, I'll include it in my show notes.
Sure. I have a website for my consulting group. It's top10ec.com. Let me spell that out for you. TOPTENNEC.com. It's like Top Tennessee shortened.
Love
And
it.
also I am on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. You can especially reach me at Twitter at top TENNEC.
All right.
So there
Awesome. And
you
like,
go.
yes. And like I said, all will be in the show notes. Mike, thank you once again. Again, such a treat.
Thank you, Eileen. It's been my pleasure.